It's now time For Your Money. We're joined here by David Nelson, CEO of Nelson Corp Wealth Management. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So just getting started here, stocks, particularly in the U.S., have been looking expensive in recent times. And how has this recent decline in stocks prices impacted us?
So Wall Street likes to price things based on projected earnings. We're not a big fan of that because typically it's overstated and subsequently we're trying to justify these higher prices. The typical person out there, I think that's probably your audience as well as the people that we work with, are as a whole relatively conservative. They've worked hard for their money. They want to hold on to their money. And so what we would prefer to use is what's called the Shiller Index. People don't need to remember the name. The Shiller Index is developed by a Yale professor, Dr. Robert Shiller, and he's created this. And what he does is he goes back and he looks over the last 10 years. And by looking at the last 10 years, if they've been very good, historically the next 10 years aren't going to be very good. And this chart is absolutely fantastic as far as visually trying to illustrate it. What we find, I guess I'll just come down here to most recent history. When you're in the top band here, in the yellow or the orange-green or orange-red rather, what you typically are going to see here is that you have extremely high PEs. And as we'll see from graphic 2 will pull it in and say when you're in the high, you're going to get terrible returns. When you're in the low band, you're going to get very good returns. So we are basically right here right now as far as in that top band equates to this. And what historically has taken place is over the next 10 years, your average rate of return is 4.7%. So in other words, not very good returns. Now contrast that to when we're in the bottom. In other words, the market is sold off, things are really down. Here's what you typically can look to is somewhere between a 19% annual return and a 4% average return, with the average being 11.2%. So needless to say, it becomes obvious I'd rather have this type of environment. But where we find ourselves today is in a very expensive environment based on Robert Shiller's tool set, showing us that the returns, again, over the next 8 to 10 years are probably not going to be very good.
That makes sense. And just talking a little more about that, the information pertaining to valuations, how does that impact investors?
Yeah, so a typical person, unfortunately, we remember most recent history. And markets have been, as a whole, over the last 5-7 years, pretty good. And so people have that bias as far as in their investing demeanor. And what we want people to think in terms of is looking over a long period of time. In other words, like we were just looking at with the Shiller Index, where it shows a 10-year history that when things have been as good as they have been, typically the following 10 years are not going to be very good. So again, we would not be rushing in and putting money to work today necessarily, any additional money, just simply from the valuation perspective, things are very expensive today.
Thanks for the information.
Appreciate
and thank you for joining us this morning. And if you missed any of our discussion, we'll make it available for you on ourquadcities.com.